I've lived my life just being a curious citizen, somebody who's passionate about asking questions. And even when I came in to Marrakesh, it said, what is your occupation? And I put curious. And he scanned down and he said, oh, consultant. And I was like, yeah, maybe that works. I was the kid that when parents dropped their children off at school, they would look through the window and they would see their children sitting next to me and they would always go, no, move away, get away from him. You're going to fail if you sit next to him. And they would walk in and drag their children to the other side of the room and leave them there. And for me, I was far more comfortable outside the window. I wanted to be as far away from inside of the box as possible. That was my mission. Asking questions, being curious, being thrown out of the classroom was kind of a bit of an experience for me because I was like, yeah, I could get out of here. I've had this incredible sort of, I guess, fortune to go and travel around the world and make it my career. And that has led me to some extraordinary experiences. And this is where my sort of, as you heard, my next big journey started. I was just back from a trip and I was looking for ideas around what to do next and how do we generate awareness. And I was reading this very obscure report that the UN had put out all about the sort of accumulation of plastic in our ocean. And it sort of struck me, as I'd just come back from the North Pole at that time in 2006, it struck me that, here we were talking about these issues of, let's say, climate change, but they're very untouchable. People couldn't touch and feel them. How do we create something that people could touch and feel? And here was this human manifestation, this sort of fingerprint in our ocean of modern consumerism and consumption and our everyday products and services. And I was kind of shocked. I was thinking, it's amazing. We've got this swirling mass in our ocean. And later I sort of found out it wasn't just in one location. It's in multiple locations. And that's where my next sort of crazy adventure started. And I started to think about it. I was like, well, what is one of the sort of pin-ups of sort of throwaway consumerism? It has to be the plastic bottle, the plastic water bottle. So I started thinking about this concept, and I went and pitched a film director and said, I got this idea, we're going to sail to the ocean with a bunch of artists, they're going to grab trash from the ocean, and then we're going to sail back again, and we're going to build sculptures, we'll present them all around the world. And he went, that sounds a bit boring. I'm a film director, and if, the artists don't fall overboard, or they start sort of, arguing, or the ship sinks, or, it doesn't have much in it. So I left, that meeting with my tail between my legs and started thinking about massive ocean adventures. And the sort of the Kon-Tiki expedition came to mind. And I had this vision, and that was where I started to think about, could I build a boat made entirely of plastic bottles to sail across the Pacific? Which is probably a pretty stupid thing to think. And I quickly sort of dove into, as I usually do, into books and try and figure out, sort of methods and methodologies. And this was probably the one thing that stood out for me as soon as I asked what was quite a stupid question, was, this idea of dare to be naive. And I think it's something that, we just heard about, this idea of naivety, of stripping back what we know and getting lost, not just physically, but metaphorically. We learn so much when we're younger, and then we get to a certain point and someone, says to us, well, you've got to stop exploring now and be serious and grow up. And if you ask a question, you sort of do it very timidly and you put your hand up, And for me, this is, I think, the basis of any kind of adventure or exploring is being naive, stripping away what we know and getting to a point where you're uncomfortable. And I'm sure that happens a lot with you guys as you're out there, instigating this sort of, this way, this interactive experience for your clients. I started to think, could I maybe possibly build my boat quite similar to this, just taking big bundles of bottles, and I could just sit on them and float across the Pacific. And that was sort of the next sort of year's worth of narrative, saying, to people, hey, I'm going to get all these, bottles, put them in a big bundle, sit on them and float. And it was like, you're a crazy idiot. Dare to be naive. And I started then to engage with, obviously people who are much smarter than me, which is always a good bit of advice when you're trying to embark on an ocean adventure. I'm sure there's people here. I saw a couple of ocean expeditions out there. And I did a talk actually for Google back in, I think it was about 2006 or 7. And one of the people on stage was this architect called Michael Pollan, a fascinating character. And he was talking about biomimicry, nature-inspired design. And after the conference, we got off stage. And I walked up to him and said, have you ever designed a boat? And he said, no, never. And I said, perfect, you'll be my man. And so we started on this kind of idea of how would nature potentially build this, or how could we draw inspiration from nature? And finally, we came up actually with a couple of sort of really core pieces. So we looked at the pomegranate and the way that when it's packed together inside of its skin, it's a super tough fruit. If someone ever chucks a pomegranate at you, it hits you on the head, it kind of hurts. But then when you unpick it and pull out one of the seeds and put your thumb on it, you can just squash it. We looked at the way eggs were carried in Japan, traditionally using bamboo, these very fragile structures packed together. We started sort of building this complex system. And, you know, this went on for about 2 years, and finally someone said to me, you really ought to go and see a boat builder. That's what they do for a living. The boat has been around for thousands of years. You're not going to reinvent the boat. So I thought, well, you probably got a very good idea. So we started to go back and look at ancient Polynesian outriggers and started looking at their designs and trying to figure out how could we improve on this? How could we build a boat made entirely of plastic bottles? And this was where we started to kind of get more involved. I hired a naval architect. I sort of grew up a little bit, I guess, because people were saying to me, you're going to drown. You need to take this seriously. You can't just sit on a bag of bottles. And you can't just pretend it's a pomegranate and everything's okay. It's the Pacific, you idiot. You're going to die. As I said, we'd started with this challenge. Could we build a boat entirely of plastic bottles and not vary from that? And everybody was telling me, come on, look, melt them down, create a hull. Just melt them down. It's the only way it's going to work. And I really had to not take the path of least resistance, which is a path that we like to take, I guess, as human beings. And I was stubborn, and I said, no, we have to make sure that the bottles are visible and the bottles are functioning. They're not just, you know, an add-on at the end, an afterthought. They've got to have something that makes sure that they make the boat work. It's got to be part of the functioning. So we started on this sort of 3-year journey, getting everything together. And actually, it was during this that we started to figure out something quite unique. And this is what a lot of environmentalists don't like me to say. But actually, plastic is not the enemy. It's how we view the material and how we use it. And it was only during this conversation with the team that we realized we could deconstruct the idea of plastic being actually a very smart material. And we had to engineer a totally new material. So we basically had to come up with a way in which we could create what's called a monopolymer, a single polymer material. And we took the plastic bottles, as you can see, there's 12,500 of them that we collected from the trash in San Francisco. And then we started, this was in our rental house in San Francisco. They thought we were sort of, you know, drug dealers baking meth or something in there, but really we were baking plastic, which wasn't much better, I guess, for us. But we all ran around, you know, with this sort of very funny smell lingering after us. We had to engineer new glues for the project, so we started using cashew nut and sugar glues, which we came up with. We started pushing the sort of bounds of innovation, really kind of pushing this conversation around how can plastic become part of the problem versus being part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Finally, after it was about 3.5 years of making mistakes, we managed to construct this. This is the underside. This was being lifted into the water back in 2009. 12,500 bottles making up the bottom of the boat. The entire boat made entirely of PET, which is the plastic that is your water bottle, your simple mono-material. I always see people say, you know, how was the R&D? And I would go, it was really more D and then R. And I think that's something we can take away. When you develop something and you actually dive into it, it creates the research that you need to know what it isn't that's working or, you know, where things go wrong. People often will procrastinate and spend hours on the R before they do any development. And I think that's something that obviously can be taken away in the field that you're in, just those little iterations and obviously getting feedback. And actually, you know, one of the things that I missed more than anything was as the expedition grew, as we built this narrative and we got all these different media partners, one of the things that happened was that the experience for me on a very personal level was sort of taken away from me. It was now owned by other people. It was owned by the media, which was what I wanted. But the idea of silence, being at sea, being in that experience, as we talk about, the sort of with nothing. North Pole, South Pole, Greenland jungle, no phones. And in some ways, the communication was incredible because we had the opportunity to tweet out when things were going wrong, and we would have these experts come back and, you know, invariably people would mess around with us and tell us to do things that were completely wrong, which I always thought was kind of amusing. Somebody would be like, no, totally take your sail down, you know, and we'd be in a storm. And they'd, no, leave it down. And then we'd be like, should we do that? So there were 6 of us on this boat, living on this platform, this incredible platform for 4 months, floating across the Pacific. We stopped in the Line Islands, which is a very sort of nondescript group of islands about 1,000 miles south of Hawaii in the far South Pacific. We then were meant to stop in Fiji. We missed Fiji, so we ended up in Samoa because it was right in front of us and we couldn't sort of get out of the way. So we're like, Samoa, great. So we'd got to Samoa. We'd been traveling across the Pacific for months. We managed to, as I said, do these live streams. This was actually streaming live from the boat into Times Square, which was kind of extraordinary. And then from Samoa, we headed across to New Caledonia, and on our way down to Sydney, that was kind of quite a funny, humorous map that I did on the way here, and there was a lot more circles than that. As you can imagine, we were going in circles many, many times, and people often ask, what were the storms like, and what did you eat? And there were plenty of storms, and obviously nothing too big, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. There were some pretty hairy moments where we had to, sort of, I guess, shut up shop, and we were bobbing around, and I remember one big night, there was these huge popping of storms, and I was on deck, and it's about 4 in the morning, and I'm, trying to kind of move the boat on this tiller system, and it's dead calm. No one's really saying much. It's me and this, I have 2 others on watch with me. There was Dave, and the thing about Dave was he was slightly cross-eyed, so he was never very good at on watch, so you would sort of look out, and he'd sort of, you give him the binoculars and say, is there a thing up there? He said, I don't really know. And then I had another guy on there called Olaf who was slightly deaf, so he wasn't that great on watch. So we had this kind of like hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil group on the back of the boat. So one night we see this sort of light in front of us, and I'm like, hey, Dave, have a look. And he obviously was like, no, I can't see anything. I had a look, and I was like, yeah, there's a boat coming straight towards us. So we panicked a little bit, and we started flashing our lights up onto the sail, and we started to sort of get a bit more nervous as this boat started to approach us. We got onto the radio, and we're like, boat in the vicinity of wherever we were. This is the Plastiki. Do you read me? Over. Absolutely nothing. And we could see this thing traveling pretty much straight at us. And I remember that point thinking, that's it. I guess we just kind of disappear. That's how people disappear. They just disappear. Finally, at the sort of last minute, I guess this boat had obviously, we had either moved a little bit and the boat had moved a little bit, and this huge tanker went past us, probably from here to where the exit was. We could smell all the bunker fuel, and the bow waves were coming over the front of us. and it finally kind of disappeared off, and bing, up on the radar came the name of the boat, which was Forest Harmony, which I thought was kind of ironic, really. Here we were in the middle of the Pacific. Can you imagine? Boat, drowned. Environmentalists killed by Forest Harmony, as it was in the middle of the Pacific, which would have been quite funny. Anyway, we finished this incredible voyage, and it created this massive, media storm, and all these great things happened. And I remember getting off the boat and kind of talking to this lady here. That's me again in my very odd hat. I think she was laughing at my hat, in fact. She asked me, what does it feel like? Have you feel like you've done something really remarkable? And I kind of got off, and I was like, well, no, I don't think we really did, in a way. I mean, I think we had an incredible journey, but remarkable would have been taking it one stage further and would have been halting the amount of plastics that end up in our ocean, or at least reconsidering the way that we view the material. And that we hadn't done. We had started a narrative that today is continuing. And, we ended up getting voted as one of the 50 best innovations in Time magazine, all these things. But I still was completely, there was something missing in my head about how do we go to the next step. And it started to kind of, and I think this is where all of you in the audience have an opportunity to contribute to this, is like, how do we get people, myself, you guys, to start thinking about how do we re-engage and re-sort of value our relationship with nature. And we're going through this crazy nature emergency right now, and I call it. And these are the sort of 5 stages, and this is the Kubler-Ross model for analyzing grief and suffering. And you can actually use these, I think, for a lot of things. But it's very relevant when it comes to things like the issue of the environment. The first stage has been denial. We've all done, that doesn't exist. Bloody hippies, shut up. Sweep it under the carpet. Then there's anger. A lot of anger about the issue. Everyone seems to get very angry about environmental issues, oddly. Then we bargain, how much, maybe man-made, not man-made. That's always an interesting little bargain. Then we get all depressed about it. Oh my God, this is awful. I read about the dolphins. And, it's like, who in here hates nature? Anyone hate nature? Anyone like that? Dolphin? Pfft, no hands? Nobody's like, no, I hate nature. Other than one hand, there's some guy at the back, he's stretching, I think. He's like, I fucking hate nature. But how do we get to acceptance, right? I kind of feel like we don't, there's a sort of, we're playing death Jenga in a way, right? If you think about it, we pull out these systems, we pull out these species from our ecosystem, and when we pull them out, the thing sort of starts to wobble, and we don't know what we've quite pulled out, right? So there was sort of intentionality in a way when we were hunter-gatherers. Now we just kind of, because of the way that we consume, we're kind of just constantly causing this massive destruction. And I think that as an environmentalist, which I don't really like the phrase, we're always sort of the undertakers of despair, and we sort of rack off all these statistics about why nature is bad and what's happening to it, and more trees lost today. And so it's one of these things that we have to change. And I always kind of say, well, how do we give nature a voice? I think the first thing I would say is that we're living with a slightly outdated brain model. And people often ask me, what does that mean, an outdated brain model? Our fears, our evolutionary fears, are kind of more embedded into us than modern fears. So, when we start talking about things like climate change, we always put the word debate in there. And this is quite interesting. I was asked to go on the news in America the other day, and I got this phone call from NBC that said, big Hurricane Gonzalo about to hit. Have you seen it? Can you come and talk about it? So I Googled Hurricane Gonzalo, and everything came up about the hurricane. Hurricane bears down, blah, blah, blah. And then I put in Hurricane Gonzalo, climate change. And there was only one article at the top there that was relevant, and it was from 16 hours ago. It's exactly the same Google search, and that one was to some denier site, and the link was down. So whenever the word climate change is presented to us, we always hear the word debate. Does everyone sort of feel that that might be the case? I do, because whenever I talk about it, people go, well, it's not really true, because we don't like the bad news. So another way of giving this sort of how do we take the next step forward is to kind of, I guess, recognize that we are part of nature, right? That is our evolution. We think we can do it better. We started to kind of disconnect ourselves and create this false dichotomy that there's nature on one side and us on the other. And that at the top is a salmon fan, right? At the top where you can pick the color of salmon that you want to choose. Someone went, God, watermelons, they suck because you can't pack them properly, so let's genetically modify them to fit on the shelves, right? Can you imagine the job satisfaction when you come home? How was your day, honey? Perfect. So I just figured out square watermelons. It's going to revolutionize Costco. And now we laugh about these things, but it's actually one of the big factors that we're faced with. We do completely separate ourselves from nature. I think as a group of travelers, as instigators, organizers, adventurers, whatever you call yourselves, we have an opportunity to collaborate. And it was Buckminster Fuller, who I look at as a real sort of hero in 1962, kind of coined the phrase Spaceship Earth. And this was actually right before Earthrise in 1968 on the Apollo mission, this beautiful shot of Earth. He coined that phrase. And he said it's got to be everybody or nobody. And we are living at a time when there is a nature emergency. We are living at a time when we're more disconnected than ever from nature. We look at it as a commodity. We look at it as a hobby. And as a community of travelers and people who instigate travel and instigate those dreams, we have an opportunity, I think, to come together and work on those experiences and make them emotional and make them resonate, to use that experience. And I know a lot of people, hello. Get off the stage. A lot of people talk about activism. I think we're at a stage now where people are real activists, right? We go online and we click something. We actually say we like it when we probably should say we don't like it, but we just click things. And we view things through electronics, and we talk about the destruction of our planet, and we go, oh, I'll go on Facebook and hit that button. That might change it. So we have to become activists. And how do we become activists? How do we collaborate? I think we have to start facing up to the fact that green is a horrible color. Right? Everyone talks about, I'm green. And I'm sure as operators, I'm not saying you get rid of the green, but green became this super color. And we started to come along with these sort of big statements. And I'm sure you're faced with that. I'm sure you're under a lot of pressure from your clients who say, why are you the greenest organization ever? And we make these statements like, I'm totally green. And it's many shades. It's much more than that. It's the experience that you have. It's the experience that you can give somebody. If you have a family with you and they're sitting there in one of your hotels or your resorts or your retreats, and they get to go out and experience something emotional, that's far, I think, more empowering than trying to make a claim that your bottled water is in recycled bottles and is green. It has to be about many shades. So for all of you and for what you do, I think it's always about becoming an explorer, feeling. If you can feel it, you understand it. If you understand it, you can start to respect it. And if you can respect it, you can protect it. So I implore you just to make sure that whatever you keep doing, keep on exploring, get off the beaten path, allow your clients to do the same, allow them to feel it and be emotionally connected to the environments that you guys are custodians of. Thank you very much.